Hey folks, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today I'm going to show you 3 tips for mixing on headphones. We're going to talk mixing on headphones today, but before we dive in, if you're ready to go a little bit deeper into the mixing process and really start to hone your workflow as an engineer, then I have just the tool for you. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and it's a simple PDF that will guide you through the entire mixing process, step by step, to help you get professional and radio-ready mixes without any more hassle and without any more guesswork. It is completely free, and you can download it below using the link in the video description. Now let's jump in here and talk about mixing on headphones. Now mixing on headphones has become quite traditional over the past few years. There's a lot of, Andrew Shep's talking about mixing on airplanes, on a laptop with earbuds in, right? There's a lot of that stuff going around. A lot of home studios, it's so much easier to buy a pair of $100, $150, $200 headphones than it is to fork over $400 a speaker to buy a pair of speakers, right? $800, $1,000 to get yourself a pair of good quality or average quality studio monitors. And even that's only going to get you maybe 8 inches, 10 inches. It's a lot harder to get big 15-inch speakers for your home studio these days at something that's not going to break the budget, especially for home studios. So today, I'm going to share with you a couple tips that are going to help you get better mixes using the pair of headphones that you have in your home studio now. So tip number 1 for mixing on headphones is to get to know your headphones. And the way you want to do that is by using reference mixes. So you want to listen to music that you know what it sounds like on your headphones. So pick a couple tracks, 2, maybe 3 tracks that you know what they sound like. You listen to them all the time, even if they're just your favorite song, and listen to them before you start mixing. I have a couple reference tracks that I always import into every mix session. They sit at the bottom of my mix session. They're usually in a loop area too. Maybe it's just the chorus of both of those songs that I'll loop around, and I listen to them. I listen to each reference track a couple times before I get mixing. It centers my ears on the headphones. It gives me an idea of what things should sound like, what each of these tracks should sound like, because I know them well. I've listened to them 100 times. I know where the kick should sit. I know where the snare should sit. I know where the vocal is. I know where the instruments are panned. I know how everything sits on the side. I know where the bass is going to be. Listening to them a couple times through these reference tracks helps me get centered on my headphones, so I know where everything should be sitting, frequency-wise, spectrum-wise, front to back-wise. You want to get centered before you start getting into your mix. Otherwise, you'll get halfway through. Maybe you'll pull up a reference track or pull something in, and you'll listen to it and realize, oh, the bass is in the completely wrong place. The vocal's way too far out front, or the kick drum's way too far back. These are things you want to get in your head, in your ears, before you get into your mix. That way you're setting your levels correctly as you're building your mix, and you're not chasing your tail later down the road. So that's tip number 1, is to get familiar with your reference tracks. Now, I can't play you my reference tracks because the video will probably get copyrighted and taken down. But I can give you the tip of pulling in your reference tracks, listen through them. If you want to use an EQ too, I use an EQ to just separate out the frequency spectrum. So I'll pull in my EQ, and I usually set it to 110K. That way I can hone in on the mid-range, kind of get familiar with where all the instruments are sitting in relation to the bass, in relation to the vocal, and I can pull down and just listen to the low end too if I wanted to, just listen to 100 hertz and below, hear where the bass and the kick drum are sitting, just to get these relationships set in my head before I start setting my levels. Now, tip number 2 for mixing on headphones is making preemptive strikes at the low end, as you build out your mix. So depending on the headphones you're using, depending on how familiar you are with how they sound, you want to get your low end treated as you go along through your mix. And that means, for me, putting in high pass filters. So things that I can't hear, getting rid of them. Now, these headphones go down pretty far, but of course they do have a roll-off like most headphones do, coming off of 100, right? Anything below 100, there's usually a roll-off that's getting down. These are pretty gentle on the roll-off, so I do get a nice amount of low end out of them. These are Sennheiser HD 280 Pros. I think they're like $150. They're a good pair of headphones. They got a nice isolation on them. They're good for mixing and recording, but they have a nice frequency spectrum that I am familiar with, so I can get my low end set right. But you want to make preemptive strikes at your low end, and that means putting in high pass filters, especially on things with low end. So pulling a little bit of the sub area off the kick drum because we can't hear that, so you don't know what's down there. And then again on the bass, I'm rolling up here to about 70 hertz because I don't need any of that down there. Kick drum's my sub area, and I like my bass sitting around 70, 80 hertz area, pulling my low end weight there. But I do this all the way through my mix as I'm setting my levels. I'm pulling in high pass filters, rolling off what I don't need, cleaning up my low end, and tightening it up as I go. Let me give you a couple examples here. We'll do the kick drum, we'll do the bass, and we'll do a couple of these guitars as well. So we'll start here with our kick drum. Let me solo it up, and I'll do an A-B on just this first plug-in here so you can hear what things are sounding like with and without this high pass filter in. So we may be rolling the high pass filter up almost an octave from where it starts, but we're not reducing that much low end. We're really only tightening up our kick drum just a little bit, just softening that sub area so it's not so much or so powerful, especially if you're mixing on headphones. You're not going to hear down below about 30 hertz, maybe even below 40 hertz. So just rolling your high pass filter up, maybe 30, 35, or we have it about 35 here, just to tighten up your low end area and take care of anything that you're not hearing if you're just listening to that range, right? There's our kick drum. Let's jump here to our bass guitar. So here's our bass guitar, and I've got my bass mixing trick in, right, where I'm isolating the low end on the DI and just the top end on the amp. We'll pull off these last two plugins, just listening to our first plugin, and I'm going to A-B the high pass here. Take a listen. You can see we're reducing a lot more of the low end on the bass than we were on the kick drum. We're up at about 70 hertz here, 69.3 hertz. But our fundamental is still above where our high pass filter is. Our fundamental sitting in the 180 hertz area. So we don't need anything below that. We're keeping it gentle here because we have a couple notes that reach down to our 70 and 60 area, but pulling it up just a little bit over that helps to soften them a little bit while still rolling off all this sub area that we don't need ringing through on these bass notes. We don't need those octaves below. We don't need all that resonance ringing through on our bass. So pulling that up helps to clean things up, tighten things up, get rid of the stuff you can't hear on your headphones. Now let's take a look at this first guitar here. So same thing, we've got a high pass filter all the way up at almost 200 hertz. We don't need any of that there on an acoustic guitar because our bass and our kick drum are carrying our low end. So here's our acoustic. Now you don't always have to go as drastic as I'm going here on the acoustic or on the bass guitar, but you want to pull up your high pass filter just enough to get rid of what you don't need on the sound. But here on our acoustic, right, we're really focusing in on the heart of our acoustic sound. We don't need that 100 hertz area on this acoustic. We just need where our low end on our acoustic is sitting around the 200. So we just need our 200 hertz and up on this acoustic guitar to really bring to the table what it contributes to this mix. And again, below this 200 hertz area, sitting at around the 80 and 100 hertz area, remember, that's where our bass is sitting. That's the fundamental on our bass. And then below that, where we rolled off on our bass, that's where the fundamental on our kick drum's sitting. So it's just about making room for stuff, and slowly but surely, as you're going through, maybe your high pass filter is going to get a little bit higher, a little bit higher. You'll have stuff that sits a little bit lower, like pianos have notes that go down a little bit lower. So sometimes you'll have to pull it back a little bit. Just mess with this stuff a little bit. Go through instrument by instrument as you're setting your levels. Pull up your kick drum, set a high pass filter on it, get rid of what you don't need, move on to your snare. Pull it up, set a high pass filter, get rid of what you don't need. You're probably not going to need stuff below 80 hertz on your snare drum, right? If it's a little bit lower tuned, you'll have stuff sitting in the 100, 150 hertz range. If it's higher tuned, roll it up a little bit, 100, 150, because usually your low end on your snare is sitting around the 200 hertz area. Same thing with your toms. Find where your fundamental is, set your high pass just below it, and so on and so forth through your mix. So making preemptive strikes at your low end is going to help to keep things clean and tight in the low end area on your mix when you're mixing on headphones. Tip number 3 for mixing on headphones is probably the least attractive or the least fun tip here, but you need to take more frequent breaks if you're mixing on headphones rather than on speakers. It's easier to mix for longer periods of time on speakers, especially if you have the volume set right on your speakers, but having headphones, things that are cupped around your ears like that, your ears fatigue a lot faster and they get worn out a lot faster mixing on headphones than they do when you're sitting with a distance between the source and you. When the source is right here on your ears are going to get tired very fast. Then you're going to start chasing your tail. So if you're mixing, and maybe you get through with your drums, you start tackling your bass, and you're struggling to get your bass to sit right with your kick drum, you're going back on decisions you made before, you start chasing your tail, you're like, okay, maybe the drums didn't sound good, let me go back and remix the drums. When you find yourself going back and chasing your tail a whole bunch, stop, take your headphones off, take a break. Even if it's just for 30 minutes. You want something, a little bit of time to reset your ears. Something that I read in was it Bobby Ozinski's book a long time ago, was use something to reset your ears. He always had an old tea kettle, I believe it was, that he would, take a break from his mix, go make some tea, just the ringing of the tea kettle, or if it's the grinding of coffee beans when you're making coffee, something in the real world to reset your ears and reground you before you come back to your mix, okay? Take a break, let your ears reset, use something in the real world to wake them back up. This is what things sound like. Don't get confused, don't get stuck in your mix, and don't be chasing your tail. Okay? 3 tips here. Our first one was to use reference mixes. So use something to get your ears in tune, to get your ears familiar with where things should be sitting, balance-wise and frequency-wise. So your kick and bass relationship, your vocal and snare relationship, your guitars and vocal relationship. Get that kind of stuff in your head. Get familiar with it in a reference mix, a track that you know, before you jump in and start setting your own balances on headphones. Tip number 2 was to make preemptive strikes at your low end. When you're mixing on headphones, you're not going to have a great picture of the low end or as good of a picture of the low end as if you're mixing on big speakers with a sub in your room, right? So start pulling in high pass filters, get rid of what you don't need in the sub area, and get rid of what you don't need above the sub area too, on guitars or on vocals. Get rid of all that low end or low mid area that you don't need on your instruments before you jump into deep mixing. So as you're setting your levels, pull in high pass filters as well. Make those preemptive strikes at the low end. And tip number 3 is to take more frequent breaks when you're mixing on headphones. I would not advise going any longer, than maybe an hour mixing on headphones. Don't let them sit on your ears too long. You can damage your ears if it's too loud and you keep them on your ears for too long. So maybe every half hour, every 45 minutes, take your headphones off, take a breather, walk around the room, go get a cup of tea, go get a cup of water, have a snack break, do something to reset your ears, give your ears a break from the mix so you can come back with fresh ears and you're not chasing your tail on decisions you made earlier because your ears have changed or worn out. I hope that was helpful for you. I hope that gave you some tactics, some tricks to keep you fresh while you're mixing on headphones. And like I said at the beginning of the video, if you're ready to take your mixes to the next level and really start to dial in your workflow as an engineer, then I have just the tool for you, and it is completely free. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and you can download it below to start creating more professional mixes in less time. Thank you so much for watching. Keep your ears fresh, and I will see you in the next video.